The gym stank of sweat and rusted steel. Old Everlast gloves dangled from hooks like battle-worn trophies, and the sound of fists pounding heavy bags echoed through the cinderblock walls like distant drums of war. Malik Carter stood in the corner, wrapping his trembling hands with frayed cloth strips. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, buzzing like a dying insect, just as someone yelled from the center ring, "Yo, who's the new kid?" Malik didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the thin scar running across the back of his hand, a souvenir from a broken window in a place he no longer called home. The last thing he wanted was attention. He had only been in this gym for 2 weeks, always coming in quietly, always leaving quieter. But that morning, everything changed. "Hey Twig Arms. You gonna stand there all day or step up and do something?" The voice belonged to Jason, the Bull Myers, a local favorite in the amateur circuit, 80 kilos of cocky swagger and thick muscle. He was warming up in the ring, bouncing from foot to foot like a predator pretending to be playful. A couple of guys laughed from the sidelines. One of them nudged Malik as he passed. "He's talking to you, newbie. Time to show us what you got." Ron, the trainer, crossed his arms and stepped up next to Malik. "You don't have to do this," he said low, almost like a warning. "Sparring ain't about ego. And Jason's got plenty of that to go around." Malik looked up. For a second, he saw the ring, the worn canvas, the rope stained with blood and spit, the crowd forming a loose circle around it like wolves waiting for the hunt to begin. He thought about walking away. Thought about slipping his hoodie back on and disappearing down South Halsted the way he always did when things got messy. But something deep inside, maybe it was the fire his brother left behind, whispered, "Not this time." He nodded once. Jason grinned and waved him in like he was calling up a waiter to bring dessert. "Oh, this gone, be quick," he said, and the gym filled with cheers and mock bets. A few phones came out, already filming. Malik stepped into the ring. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth, but his face stayed calm. Quiet. The way it always was when things got serious. He touched gloves with Jason, whose grin widened like a shark. The bell rang. Jason came in fast, testing him with jabs. Malik ducked the first, barely avoided the second, felt the wind of the third graze his cheek. His mind screamed to move, but his body stayed rooted. Every muscle was coiled tight. Waiting. "You even know how to fight, bro?" Jason taunted between punches. "Did they let you in here 'cause you look cute in hand wraps?" Malik said nothing. He just watched. Studied. Jason's movements were predictable, big punches, wide swings, head always tilting left after a combo. Too confident. Too used to people backing down. Then Jason lunged in with a right hook, cocky and overextended. That's when it happened. Malik shifted his weight to his back foot, slipped under the punch, and twisted his hips like a loaded spring releasing. His left fist flew up in a clean, sharp arc, a textbook counter, and connected with Jason's jaw in a sound that echoed like a car door slamming shut. Crack. Jason's body froze mid-motion. Then, like a puppet whose strings were cut, he collapsed sideways to the mat, arms limp, mouth open, eyes fluttering. The crowd went dead silent. Ron cursed under his breath. Someone dropped their phone. Jason didn't move. Malik stepped back, breathing hard. The gym seemed to hold its breath with him. For a long second, no one knew what to say. Until someone at the back finally muttered, "Holy shit, he dropped the bull." Then the chaos began. People rushed forward, crowding the ropes, replaying the footage on their phones, shouting over one another. "That was insane. Yo, play that back. Did you see his head snap? He caught him clean, man. One punch." Jason's trainer knelt beside him, checking his pupils, yelling for water. But Jason was conscious now, dazed, blinking slowly, his ego bleeding worse than his split lip. Ron pulled Malik aside. "What the hell was that?" he asked, not angry, impressed, confused. "You told me you never fought before." "I haven't," Malik said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not like this." Ron stared at him a moment longer, then cracked a smile. "You got something in you, kid. That wasn't luck. That was instinct. Timing. Rage channeled the right way." Malik looked around the gym, still buzzing with disbelief, still watching him. For the first time in a long time, they weren't laughing. They weren't ignoring him either. And that scared him more than anything. As he stepped out of the ring, someone shoved a phone in his face. "Bro, what's your name? The world's gonna want to know who just KO'd Jason the Bull." Malik didn't answer. He just kept walking, slipping his hoodie back on like armor. Outside, the cold Chicago air hit his face like a slap, but he welcomed it. The roar of the gym faded behind him. Somewhere deep in the city, a boy they used to call Too Soft Malik had just vanished. And in his place, something else was waking up. Something angry. Something focused. Something ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the punch, before the gym, before anyone cared who he was, Malik Carter was just another quiet kid moving like smoke through the broken streets of Southside Chicago. Not quite invisible, but never seen. He grew up in a one-bedroom apartment above a bodega on 83rd and Halsted, where sirens were more common than silence and gunshots echoed like punctuation at the end of conversations. His mother, Denise Carter, worked 2 jobs, hospital cafeteria in the morning, cleaning office buildings at night, and still barely made enough to keep the heat running in winter. She used to come home smelling like bleach and burnt coffee, her eyes always heavy, her voice always soft. "You're all I got left, baby," she would whisper sometimes, brushing the hair from his forehead when he was half asleep. "You hear me? Just you." She never mentioned his father. Malik only knew the man's name because he'd seen it on a folded obituary his mom kept in the back of a photo album. Tyrone Carter, aged 25, shot outside a liquor store during a robbery gone wrong. Malik was 5 at the time. Too young to understand loss, but old enough to feel the cold space where a man should have been. But if Malik had no father, he had something better. He had Jamal. Jamal Carter was 10 years older, tall as a lamppost, with arms like tree trunks and a voice that always made people listen. He was the kind of guy who could make a room laugh with a glance, or go silent with a single word. In their neighborhood, Jamal was legend. And to Malik, Jamal was everything. When their mother was out working, Jamal taught Malik how to throw a football, how to hold his ground when kids tried to push him around, and, most importantly, how to think before acting. "Control your heat," Jamal used to say. "Don't let it control you." At night, Malik would lie on his mattress in the living room and listen to Jamal's shadowboxing thuds in the hallway, the pop-pop-pop rhythm echoing like music. He'd watch his brother practice moves from old Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard tapes, sliding between combinations with the grace of someone born to fight. "Why don't you go pro?" Malik once asked. Jamal had just smiled. Too many fists in the street to worry about gloves in a ring. That was the problem. Even with his golden heart, Jamal couldn't outrun the streets. He got caught up in small-time hustling. Not drugs, not quite. But enough bad choices to draw bad men. Malik was 15 when it happened. He remembers the call. The stillness before his mom screamed. The way she crumpled onto the floor like a dropped bag of groceries. Jamal had been stabbed outside a corner store after trying to break up a fight. One blade. One wrong night. One empty house afterward. The funeral was cold. Everyone wore black, but Malik only remembered the red of Jamal's favorite hoodie, the one they buried him in. The same one Malik would later wear under his own jacket, hidden like armor against the world. Everything changed after that. School stopped mattering. Malik drifted, a ghost in baggy jeans and quiet fury. He'd fight sometimes, quick bursts of violence in stairwells and alleyways, but he never stayed. Never boasted. Always left before the dust settled. They called him, Too Soft Malik, at school, not knowing the rage he kept under the surface like molten steel. He didn't need to prove anything to them. He needed to prove it to himself. The only person who still saw Malik clearly was his mother. But even she couldn't reach him after Jamal's death. Not completely. One night, 2 years after the funeral, Malik got jumped by 3 older kids while walking home from the library. No reason. No words. Just fists and boots and the sound of his ribs cracking like dry branches. When he stumbled through the door, bleeding and broken, Denise sat him on the couch and said only this, "You got 2 paths, Malik. One ends with you in the ground next to Jamal. The other? I don't know yet. But I know it ain't this." That night, Malik went to the old storage bin where Jamal used to keep his workout stuff. In the bottom of a milk crate, he found a pair of cracked leather gloves and a jump rope. He started there. Every morning before the city woke up, Malik would run the empty blocks with that rope in his hand. He did push-ups on concrete. Shadowboxed in abandoned alleys. He didn't tell anyone. It wasn't about showing off. It was about becoming someone Jamal might still recognize. But real training? That came later. He found Ron's gym by accident. Tucked between a pawn shop and a taco stand, it barely had a sign, just a red door and the faint sound of pads being hit behind it. He walked in and asked Ron if he could train. Ron looked him up and down. Skinny frame, quiet eyes, hoodie too big for his shoulders, and said, "You don't look like much." "I don't have to," Malik answered. Ron raised an eyebrow and handed him a mop. "Then prove it. Clean the place." So he did. Malik scrubbed floors and wiped mirrors. He picked up sweat-soaked towels and res-tacked weights. For 3 weeks, he never touched a glove. But he watched. Every move. Every drill. Every footstep. Ron eventually handed him wraps and showed him how to protect his hands. "You mess up your wrists," Ron warned, "and you're done before you start." That was the beginning. Malik didn't come to make friends. He didn't talk much. But he hit the bag harder than anyone. He stayed late. Asked questions. Took notes. Trained like he had something to prove. Because he did. Malik wasn't fighting for fame. Or revenge. Or to silence those who'd mocked him. He was fighting to remember who he used to be. Who Jamal was. Who he still could become. So when Jason, the bull, called him out that day in the ring, when the gym turned into a circus and the spotlight landed on the quiet kid in the corner, Malik didn't hesitate. Because he wasn't scared anymore. Not of fists. Not of falling. And definitely not of being seen. The gym was buzzing, but Malik stood off to the side, his heart still racing. He had dropped Jason, the bull Myers in front of everyone, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of something he wasn't sure he was ready for. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his knuckles still tingling from the punch, but it wasn't the physical pain that made his stomach turn. It was the feeling that came with being noticed. The spotlight. Malik had spent the last 2 years training in silence, hiding behind the shadows of other fighters. The kind of fighter you see in the background of a gym, silent, focused, always in the corner. But now, he had thrust himself into the center of the ring. And the attention? It felt heavy. It felt like a weight that might suffocate him if he wasn't careful. He wasn't ready for fame, not in a place like this. "You good, Malik?" Ron's voice cut through the murmur of the gym, snapping Malik out of his thoughts. The trainer was standing by the corner, arms crossed, a thoughtful look on his face. He was trying to read Malik, trying to figure out what was going on behind the cool expression. Malik didn't answer right away. He couldn't find the words. Everything had happened so fast, so unexpectedly. The crowd's reaction was still ringing in his ears, shocked murmurs, astonished gasps, some people even chanting his name like he was already a champion. "Yeah," Malik finally said, his voice low, almost hoarse. "I'm good." But he wasn't. Not really. Not when the shadows of the past still loomed over him, reminding him that everything was never as simple as it seemed. He thought about his brother, Jamal. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Jamal had trained, his every move, every punch, every decision. It was the same drive, the same fire that Malik felt in his chest now, but there was something deeper, darker about it. Jamal's passion had been reckless, guided by anger, and that had ultimately cost him his life. Malik couldn't afford to be reckless. He needed control. Focus. But what would happen if that control slipped? Would he become another casualty of the streets? Another boy lost to the system that had already taken so much from his family? The gym door slammed open, and in walked a couple of familiar faces. Marcus, a friend from high school who still didn't know Malik's full story, nodded to him with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. And behind him was Tariq, a kid from the neighborhood who had tried to bully Malik in middle school, but had backed off when Jamal had warned him. Now, the two of them were making their way toward Malik, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and curiosity. "Yo, man," Marcus said, his voice laced with admiration. "You really knocked out the bull with one punch. That shit's crazy." Malik didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not from people who didn't know the whole story. People who didn't understand that the fight in the ring was just a small piece of a much bigger struggle. Tariq leaned in, his smile wide and mocking. "You're making a name for yourself, Malik. You know that, right?" Malik's chest tightened. He didn't want to be a spectacle. He didn't want his name spread through the neighborhood like a new headline. He didn't want anyone to expect him to be something he wasn't. But Tariq wasn't done. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Jason's a big deal around here. You don't mess with the bulls, not unless you're ready for what's coming next." Malik stared at Tariq, feeling his throat tighten. He knew what Tariq meant. He could hear the threat in his voice, the unspoken warning that being noticed wasn't always a good thing in this world. That Jason wouldn't forget. That Jason would come back harder. And Malik? He wasn't ready for that. He wasn't ready for the bullseye that had just been painted on his back. Ron seemed to sense the shift in the air, because he appeared out of nowhere and put a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Go hit the bag," Ron said, his voice low and firm, like a command. "Clear your head. You've earned it." Malik nodded, grateful for the distraction. He turned away from Tariq and Marcus, heading toward the back of the gym where the heavy bags hung like silent giants. The sound of his feet against the floor was the only thing keeping him grounded as he moved to the nearest bag and began to wrap his hands once more. He felt the familiar texture of the cloth against his skin. Felt the familiar burn in his shoulders as he pulled the wrap tight, tightening the knots with precision. It was a ritual, a moment of focus in the chaos. But even as he began to punch the bag, his mind kept racing. What would Jason do now? The first few jabs were weak, a distraction. His punches barely landed, slipping across the surface of the bag like water across stone. His mind wasn't in the fight. It wasn't in the rhythm. He was still thinking about Jason. About what he had done. About what was coming next. He couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now. Not after everything. His fist collided with the bag again, this time harder. He imagined Jason's smug face, the way the gym had reacted when he dropped him with one punch. Jason had been the king of that ring, the one who everyone talked about, everyone feared. Malik had taken that from him with a single move, and now, Jason would want to reclaim his crown. And Malik? Malik didn't know if he was ready to wear that crown. The bell above the door rang, signaling the arrival of a new fighter. Malik's fists slowed, but his mind didn't. The tension in the gym was palpable now. Jason wasn't done with him, that much was clear. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and took a deep breath. He had made a name for himself, but with it came expectations. With it came the pressure. The weight of the streets. Of the gym. Of everything. He wasn't ready for the consequences of his actions. But he was ready to fight. Malik didn't know if he could control everything. But he would try. For himself. For his brother. For the family that had already lost too much. The gym filled with the sounds of gloves hitting pads and feet tapping the floor. But Malik's thoughts were still with the fight that loomed ahead. It was coming. And he had to be ready. The days after Malik's shocking knockout of Jason, the Bull Myers felt like a haze. The gym buzzed with rumors and whispers, the kind that spread through a place like wildfire. Did you see that kid? Who the hell is Malik Carter? The Bull got knocked out in one punch, by him. It was all anyone could talk about, and Malik couldn't shake the feeling of being caught in the middle of something far bigger than he'd ever intended. Every time he stepped foot in the gym, the atmosphere shifted. The older fighters who had once ignored him now glanced his way, sizing him up, wondering if they were next. The sound of gloves punching pads seemed louder now, like the echoes of the gym were calling him out. Telling him that this was no longer just about training. This was about proving something. To himself. To everyone else. And deep down, Malik knew that the only way to silence the noise was to step into the ring again. He'd never truly wanted fame. He hadn't even planned on being noticed that day. But now, standing at the edge of the ring, feeling the rough texture of the ropes against his skin, he couldn't deny the pull of it. This was his chance to prove himself, not just to the world, but to the ghost of Jamal that still lingered in his mind. Malik, Ron's voice cut through his thoughts. The trainer was standing at the ring's edge, his arms crossed, watching Malik closely. You ready? Malik looked up at Ron, his heart pounding in his chest. The gym had gone quiet. Everyone was waiting. Expecting. And Malik felt the pressure of it all bearing down on him. I'm ready, he said, his voice steady despite the fire swirling inside him. Ron nodded, but his expression remained unreadable. He didn't say anything more as he stepped back, giving Malik space to climb into the ring. Malik took a deep breath, then stepped through the ropes, his legs slightly trembling as the crowd in the gym cheered. He could feel the eyes of the other fighters on him, the weight of their expectations pressing down with every step he took. But he had no choice now. He couldn't back out. The only way out was forward. Across the ring, the figure of his opponent, a big guy named Tyrone, stood waiting. Tyrone was built like a freight train. Wide shoulders, bulging arms, and a chest that looked like it could take a hit from a truck. He'd been at the gym longer than Malik and was one of the top contenders in the gym. Everyone knew that if Malik was going to prove anything, he'd have to face someone like Tyrone. Malik's stomach tightened. Tyrone wasn't Jason. Jason had been big, but Tyrone was another level altogether. The guy had strength and experience. This wouldn't be an easy fight. But there was something about facing this man, this challenge, that made Malik feel alive in a way he hadn't felt before. This wasn't about proving himself to the streets or to anyone in the gym. This was about surviving in the ring. About becoming the kind of fighter Jamal had always dreamed of him becoming. Let's make it interesting, Tyrone called across the ring, a smirk playing on his lips. Hope you're ready, kid. You ain't ready for me. Malik didn't flinch. He just nodded and bounced on his toes, trying to steady his breath, calm his nerves. The sound of the bell ringing in the gym was like a cue to the chaos that followed. Tyrone came at him fast, throwing a series of jabs that Malik dodged with quick, practiced movements. He could feel the heat of Tyrone's punches slicing through the air, but Malik kept his focus. He knew this fight wasn't about brute strength. It was about strategy. About knowing how to read his opponent. Tyrone tried to close the distance, but Malik slid back, using his footwork to stay just out of reach. He had been taught to stay light on his feet, to never get cornered. But Tyrone wasn't the type of guy to give up easily. He came again, his fists like hammers, but Malik ducked under one swing and landed a quick jab to Tyrone's ribs. Tyrone grunted, his eyes flashing with anger as he retaliated with a powerful hook that Malik barely managed to dodge. He could feel the breeze of the punch on his cheek, but it didn't land. He was getting faster, sharper with each move. He could hear Ron's voice in his head, "Control your heat. Don't let it control you." But the heat was building. Malik felt it, his heart pounding, his muscles burning, his breath coming faster. This was what he'd been waiting for. This was his moment. Tyrone, frustrated with Malik's dodging, stepped in closer, trying to trap him in the corner of the ring. Malik knew he couldn't let that happen. He took a step back, keeping his distance, then landed a series of quick jabs to Tyrone's head, snapping his opponent's head back. The crowd gasped. Malik felt a surge of confidence, but it was fleeting. Tyrone was still coming, still pushing forward. The round ended, and Malik stepped back to his corner, his chest heaving, his hands already feeling the burn. Ron gave him a quick nod, then wiped sweat from Malik's brow. "You're doing good," Ron said, his voice calm. "But don't get cocky. This guy's got power. Keep moving." Malik nodded, his jaw clenched. He wasn't about to let the fight slip away. Not now. Not after everything. As the second round began, Malik could feel the change in the air. Tyrone wasn't just trying to win anymore, he was trying to make a point. He came at Malik with everything he had, swinging for the fences, trying to break Malik down with sheer force. But Malik had learned from his past mistakes. He couldn't let Tyrone dictate the pace. Malik's feet moved in rhythm with the chaos around him. Each punch Tyrone threw, Malik countered with precision. Every jab, every dodge, every quick step was a part of the plan, his plan. Malik wasn't just reacting anymore. He was controlling the fight. The crowd started to murmur again, sensing the shift. This wasn't the easy win Tyrone had expected. Malik wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting to win. And he could feel it. He could feel the fight in him, the same fight that had burned in his chest since Jamal's death, since his brother had whispered those words in his ear all those years ago. Control your heat. Malik wasn't just a shadow anymore. He wasn't just the quiet kid from Southside Chicago. He was the fighter who had just taken the first steps towards something bigger, something more. And as the bell rang to end the second round, Malik's heart pounded not with fear, but with anticipation. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But Malik could already see where it was going. The gym was packed, the noise deafening, the air thick with sweat and the smell of leather. Malik's fists were already sore from the first 2 rounds, and his body screamed for a break, but he couldn't afford one. Tyrone wasn't just another opponent to him anymore, he was a test. A symbol of everything that Malik had been running from. This wasn't just about a fight in the ring, this was about his place in the world. The bell rang for the third round, and Malik stepped forward, his legs still feeling like lead, his chest tightening with every breath he took. Tyrone, looking like a bull, came charging in again, fast, fierce, unrelenting. He swung a vicious right hook, and Malik barely managed to duck, feeling the rush of air as it narrowly missed his face. Tyrone wasn't pulling punches anymore. This was no longer just about training, it was about survival. Malik's heart pounded as he shuffled to his left, trying to avoid Tyrone's oncoming blows. He couldn't back down, not now, not after everything. But there was something else, something darker, that crept into his thoughts. The pressure. The weight of the gym watching him. Of everyone who expected him to be the next big thing. Ron's words echoed in his mind, control your heat. But no matter how hard Malik tried, the heat was consuming him. He ducked under a left jab and landed a solid counter to Tyrone's ribs. The crowd roared in approval, but Malik barely heard them. He couldn't hear anything but the sound of his own heartbeat, the thunderous pulse in his ears. Tyrone responded with a vicious jab to Malik's face, sending him stumbling backward. The blow landed harder than any punch Malik had ever felt, and for a split second, the world seemed to spin. His vision blurred, his legs wobbled, and for the first time, Malik wasn't sure if he could keep going. He stepped back to regain his footing, feeling the pain shoot through his jaw, but something inside him sparked. He remembered his brother's words. He remembered everything that had led him to this moment, the sacrifices, the struggles, the quiet hours in the gym where nobody was watching. This wasn't just about boxing anymore, this was about proving he was more than the kid who'd been overlooked. More than the kid who'd lost everything. The crowd's cheers felt distant, like they were coming from another world. Malik's world had shrunk to the space inside that ring. The tight ropes, the bright lights, the sweat dripping down his face, the rhythmic pounding of his heart. This was it. He was in the middle of the storm, and there was only one way out, fight. Tyrone lunged at him again, this time with a hook so wide Malik could see it coming. He dodged, stepping to the side just as the punch missed, but Tyrone's body followed him, pushing him back into the ropes. Malik's back hit the ropes with a dull thud, and he gasped for air, feeling the pressure of Tyrone's weight against him. The bigger fighter was trying to wear him down. To make him quit. For a moment, everything went still. Time seemed to freeze, and Malik's mind went blank. He wasn't thinking about the fight, about Tyrone, or the crowd. He wasn't thinking about Ron's coaching or the pressure on his shoulders. He was thinking about the feeling of being trapped. Of being cornered, just like he had been his entire life. And suddenly, he felt the anger he had buried deep inside him begin to surface. It wasn't just the fight anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about showing himself that he could do it. That he could survive the pressure. That he could overcome the odds. I am not my brother, he thought to himself. I'm not him. I won't be him. And with that thought, Malik snapped. He pushed off the ropes with everything he had, shoving Tyrone's weight back with surprising force. For a moment, Tyrone was caught off guard, stumbling backward. Malik used that split second of hesitation to close the distance between them. He ducked under Tyrone's guard and, before Tyrone could react, unleashed the hardest right hook of his life. It landed square on Tyrone's jaw with a sickening crack. The gym fell silent. Tyrone's body went limp, and for a brief moment, the entire world seemed to pause. Malik's fist was still hanging in the air, the echo of the punch still ringing in his ears. The crowd held its breath. Then, as if on cue, Tyrone collapsed to the mat with a heavy thud, his body sprawled out on the canvas like a fallen tree. Malik stood there, chest heaving, sweat running down his face, staring at the fighter he had just dropped with one punch. His hand was still clenched, and his heart was still racing, but something had shifted inside him. He had done it. He had just knocked out one of the toughest guys in the gym. He had just proven that he wasn't just some kid from the streets who couldn't fight back. He wasn't his brother. For the first time in his life, Malik felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't just about the fight. It wasn't about the victory. It was about the realization that, deep down, he had always been capable of more than anyone, including himself, had ever believed. The referee began his count, but Malik's mind was already far away from the gym, from the crowd, from everything. All he could hear was the roar of his own pulse, the thunderous beat of his heart in his ears. The crowd had exploded into chaos, but Malik didn't care. He was still caught in that moment. In that punch. Tyrone didn't get back up. The referee raised Malik's hand into the air, but Malik didn't even notice. His chest was tight, his head spinning, but for the first time, it wasn't the pressure that weighed him down, it was the relief. The weight of expectation had lifted. He had taken control of his heat. And it had set him free. The sound of the gym's cheers and applause faded into the background as Malik stood frozen, his hands still raised by the referee. He barely registered the crowd's eruption, all he could hear was the rush of blood in his ears and the steady pounding of his heart. He had done it. One punch. One single punch, and Tyrone, the untouchable force, was lying unconscious on the canvas. It was over. But Malik's mind wasn't at peace. It was spinning, swirling, as the realization of what had just happened began to sink in. Ron's voice cut through the haze. "Malik," he called, his tone sharp. "Get to the locker room, now." The urgency in Ron's voice snapped Malik back to reality, and he quickly made his way toward the locker room, his body still buzzing with adrenaline. As he pushed through the gym's narrow hallways, he could feel the eyes of every fighter on him. They were watching him like he was some kind of god. Malik couldn't decide if he liked it or hated it. When he reached the locker room, he threw himself onto a bench and wiped the sweat from his face, trying to steady his breathing. But the euphoria was fleeting. It was replaced by a cold emptiness, as if something was missing. Something he hadn't expected. Ron entered the room a few moments later, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he grabbed a towel from the bench and handed it to Malik. "You did good," he finally said, his voice soft. "But don't get used to this kind of attention. It's not all it's cracked up to be." Malik looked up at Ron, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean?" "You knocked out Tyrone," Ron said, his tone hardening. "That's a big deal. But it's also a target on your back. People are going to expect more from you. They're going to want you to keep proving yourself. And that kind of pressure can break you, Malik. You have to stay grounded." Malik absorbed Ron's words, but the sting of his own victory still lingered. He had won. He had proven himself. He had earned the respect he had fought for. But now that it was over, he felt lost. What was he supposed to do with all this attention? With this newfound reputation? Ron seemed to sense Malik's unease and sat down next to him. "This isn't just about boxing, kid. It's about who you are, who you want to be. If you let the fame and the pressure change you, you'll lose yourself in the process." Malik's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I don't know who I am anymore, Ron. I don't know what I'm doing all this for." Ron studied him for a long moment before responding. "I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I will say this, don't let the world define you. Find out who you are for yourself. You've got the talent, the heart, and the drive. But you've got to know why you're doing this. Because if you're just doing it for the applause, for the validation, it'll never be enough. Not in this game." The words hit Malik harder than any punch had. He'd spent so long fighting for something, but he had never really taken the time to think about what that something was. He had spent his whole life trying to escape the shadow of Jamal, but in doing so, he had neglected the most important thing of all, himself. "Thanks, Ron," Malik said quietly, his voice rough. "I'll figure it out. I just need time." Ron nodded. "You've got it. But don't waste it. Because the next fight could be your last." Malik sat in silence, absorbing everything Ron had said. The gym, the people, the applause, all of it felt so distant now. He had come to the gym to fight, to prove himself. But now that he had proven he could fight, the question was no longer about the ring. It was about his life. Who was Malik Carter, really? What did he want? Was he just a product of the street, a kid looking for validation, or was there something deeper driving him? As Malik sat there, the noise of the gym began to fade into a dull hum, like a distant memory. He closed his eyes and thought about his brother, Jamal. He thought about the late nights they'd spent together, training in the gym, pushing each other to be better. He remembered Jamal's voice, his unwavering belief in Malik's potential. "You're gonna make it, Malik," Jamal had said, just before he'd gone away for good. "You've got what it takes. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Malik opened his eyes, staring at his reflection in the small mirror above the bench. For the first time in a long while, he saw something different in himself. Not just the fighter, not just the guy who could knock out a heavy hitter like Tyrone. But the person who had the potential to be more. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a purpose, his own purpose. And no matter how tough the road got, he was going to keep fighting. Not for anyone else, but for himself. The days following his win were a whirlwind of interviews, calls, and demands from people who had suddenly become interested in his story. Malik could feel the weight of his newfound fame pushing down on him. People expected him to continue winning, to continue proving that he was the next big thing in boxing. But the more the pressure mounted, the more Malik began to retreat into himself. The gym became a place of refuge. Every punch he threw in training was another step toward figuring out who he really was. But as the days passed, he began to realize something important: he didn't have to have it all figured out right away. He didn't need the validation of others to know his worth. What mattered was that he had the courage to keep going, no matter how uncertain the future seemed. It wasn't about the next fight, the next knockout, or the applause. It was about the journey of self-discovery and growth. And for the first time in his life, Malik felt ready to take that next step. Malik stood at the edge of the gym's ring, the familiar scent of leather and sweat filling the air. He had been here countless times before, but today felt different. The energy was different. The gym had become a place of reflection for him since his fight with Tyrone. He had faced that moment of doubt, that empty feeling after achieving something big, and now, he knew what he needed to do. But he wasn't sure what it was going to take to make it happen. His body was still sore from the fight. Every muscle ached, but his mind was sharper than ever. The noise in the gym was muted. The other fighters sparred in the background, but Malik's focus was solely on himself now. He had come a long way, but he knew that there was still more to learn, more to prove to himself. He glanced over at Ron, who was pacing by the training mats, talking to a few of the other fighters. Ron had become more than just a coach to Malik, he had become a mentor, a voice of reason. But now, Malik wondered if even Ron knew how far Malik still had to go. The world had seen his potential, but Malik knew there were parts of himself still hidden. The fear. The self-doubt. The pain that no one saw, not even Ron. These were the things that Malik hadn't yet faced. But that would change today. "All right, kid, you're up," Ron called over, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the gym. Malik snapped to attention, instinctively tightening his gloves as he stepped into the ring. The sound of his boots hitting the canvas was the only thing he could hear. The other fighters stopped for a moment to watch, but Malik barely noticed them. He was focused on the challenge ahead, not the audience. Ron wasn't going to put him in the ring for a typical sparring match. No, this time, the opponent was someone new, someone who could push him past his limits, someone who could break through the walls Malik had built around himself. Malik's opponent was none other than Devin Cole, a fighter from out of town who had built a reputation for being a vicious, fast-paced brawler with a high knockout rate. Devin had heard about Malik's victory over Tyrone, and he was itching to see if the newcomer could really back up his talk. He wasn't just another fighter, he was a seasoned veteran with a hunger for blood. He was the kind of fighter who could push Malik into a corner, test his resolve, and make him question everything. Malik took a deep breath. This wasn't just a physical fight, it was mental, too. He wasn't just facing a fighter in the ring, he was facing his own insecurities, his own fears. He had proven that he could knock out a heavy hitter once, but could he do it again? Could he handle the pressure? Or would he crack? Devon climbed into the ring, his eyes locking with Malik's. His smile was smug, as though he already knew the outcome. But Malik wasn't here to play by anyone else's rules. Ron, noticing the tension in the air, gave a small nod. Stay focused, Malik. Don't let him get into your head. The bell rang, and immediately, Devon lunged forward with wild intensity, swinging a flurry of punches aimed straight at Malik's face. Malik danced back, using his footwork to avoid the barrage of attacks. This wasn't like Tyrone. Devon was fast, relentless, and unpredictable. Malik had to stay on his toes, every fiber of his body alert. The first few punches from Devon were blocked, but the speed of the man was starting to overwhelm Malik. He didn't have the power of Tyrone behind him, but Devon's unpredictability and speed were something else entirely. He wasn't sure if his body could keep up, but he knew he couldn't let this fight slip away. Malik moved quickly to the side, narrowly dodging a sharp right hook that could have ended the fight. The crowd around the ring roared in excitement as the exchange grew more heated. Devon wasn't giving him any room to breathe, pushing forward with an intensity that made it feel like there was no escape. Malik's body was burning, his muscles screaming in protest, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Then it happened. Devon made a mistake, a quick opening that Malik seized in an instant. He slipped inside Devon's guard and launched a counterattack, a brutal left hook to the body, followed by a sharp jab to the face. Devon staggered back, momentarily stunned. It was the opening Malik had been waiting for. But just as Malik moved in to press his advantage, Devon recovered and swung a left hook with ferocious speed. Malik didn't see it coming. The punch landed clean, crashing into Malik's jaw with a force that sent shockwaves through his skull. Malik's vision blurred, and for a moment, the world spun out of control. His legs felt like they were made of rubber, and he swayed in the center of the ring, his body struggling to stay upright. Stay up, Malik. Stay up. Ron shouted from the sidelines, his voice full of urgency. The gym around him felt like it was closing in. The faces of the other fighters, the lights overhead, the noise, all of it became distant and muffled. It was just him and the ring, and in that moment, Malik wasn't sure if he had enough left in him to keep going. But then, something inside him snapped. He thought of the life he had lived, the struggles, the pain, the endless fight for validation. He thought of his brother, Jamal, and the dreams they had shared of making it out of their circumstances. Jamal's voice echoed in his mind, "You've got what it takes." The surge of adrenaline hit Malik like a jolt. He wasn't going to let this defeat him. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. Malik wiped the blood from his lip and pushed himself forward. He refused to let Devon dictate the fight. He wasn't here to be a stepping stone. With a roar, Malik surged back into the fight, throwing a right cross that landed flush on Devon's chin. The crowd gasped as Devon staggered, the punch clearly rattling him. And that was all Malik needed. With a precise combination of jabs and hooks, he pushed Devon back into the ropes. The momentum was shifting, and for the first time since the fight began, Malik was in control. The bell rang, signaling the end of the round, but Malik didn't stop. His breathing was heavy, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He had taken the hit, had been knocked down, but he was back on his feet. This wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about everything. The bell had barely rung to signal the end of the round before Malik felt the weight of the fight's consequences settling in. His body was sore, his breath ragged, and his mind raced with thoughts of what had just transpired. He had won the round. Barely. The crowd had cheered as he'd regained control of the fight, but Malik felt something deeper stirring inside him, a mix of relief, pride, and unease. As he walked back to the corner of the ring, he caught a glimpse of Ron, his coach, who was standing with his arms crossed, watching him with an unreadable expression. There was no congratulatory slap on the back, no enthusiastic pep talk. Just silence. Malik tried to steady his breath, wiping his face with a towel, but the truth was, he didn't feel victorious. He felt unsettled. "Get your head straight, Malik," Ron called out, his voice firm but not harsh. "That was better, but you're still holding back. What the hell is going on in your head?" Malik's jaw clenched. He had thought that, after all this time, after everything he had gone through, he would finally feel like he had control, like he had earned his place in the ring. But the truth was, there was a part of him that felt like an imposter. He wasn't sure if it was the pressure, the expectations, or his own insecurities creeping up on him, but something was off. "I'm fine," Malik muttered, but the words didn't carry the confidence he'd hoped. He wasn't fine. Not at all. Ron stepped closer, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Listen, Malik. You're a damn good fighter. But this isn't just about throwing punches. It's about understanding why you're in there. What are you really fighting for? Because right now, I don't think you know." The question hit Malik harder than any punch he'd taken. What was he fighting for? To prove he could win? To make a name for himself? To escape the past? He had spent so much time trying to figure out how to be in the ring, but now that he was in it, he didn't know what came next. "I don't know," Malik admitted, his voice low. "I just know I can't lose. I can't let them see me fail." Ron sighed, his grip tightening slightly. "That's the problem, Malik. You're not fighting for yourself. You're fighting for them. And that will never be enough." Malik swallowed, the weight of Ron's words sinking in. The gym, the applause, the cheers, it all felt so empty now. He had spent years chasing the wrong thing. He had been chasing the approval of others, the validation that would make him feel whole. But it didn't work that way. It wasn't about the win, it was about the purpose behind it. He needed to understand his own fight. "Take a step back, Malik," Ron continued. "We're not in a race. You've got time to figure this out. But if you don't, you'll burn yourself out, and this whole thing will turn into nothing more than a game." Malik nodded slowly, taking in Ron's advice. As much as he hated to admit it, Ron was right. The victory against Devon felt hollow. Sure, he had proven something, but it was still just the beginning of a long journey he wasn't sure he understood. He had knocked down a seasoned fighter, but had he truly grown as a person? Did he even know who he was beyond the gloves and the ring? He glanced up at the clock, realizing the round was almost over. He shook his head and refocused. There was still more to do. No time for self-pity, not in the ring. He had learned to survive here, but surviving wasn't enough anymore. The bell rang, signaling the start of the next round, and Malik stood up straighter. He couldn't afford to get lost in his head. Not now. Not with the eyes of everyone in the gym on him. They had seen his potential. They had seen him fight back. But Malik wasn't just fighting to win anymore. He was fighting to understand. Hours later, after the final bell had rung, Malik walked out of the gym into the cold evening air. His body felt like it was made of lead, every muscle protesting, but his mind was alive, buzzing with the events of the day. The fight with Devon had been a turning point, not just in his boxing career, but in his personal life. As he stepped out into the parking lot, he spotted a familiar face leaning against a car, a figure he hadn't expected to see tonight. Jamal's old friend, Deshaun, stood there, his arms folded and his face serious. Malik hadn't spoken to him in weeks, not since Jamal's passing, but Deshaun had always been a constant in his life. Still, he hadn't expected him to show up at the gym. "Yo, Malik," Deshaun called out as Malik approached. "Can we talk?" Malik nodded, the heaviness of the conversation already weighing on him. "What's up, Deshaun?" Deshaun pushed off the car and walked toward him, his eyes filled with something Malik couldn't quite read. "You've been fighting hard, huh? Saw the fight today. Not bad. But I can see it, man. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for a whole lot of other people. Malik's chest tightened. What's that supposed to mean? Look, man, Deshaun said, his tone softening. You've been running from your past for a long time. From everything. And I get it. I get why you want to prove yourself. But at some point, you gotta stop running. You've got to face it. You're carrying a lot of weight, and it's showing in the ring. Malik clenched his fists, the anger bubbling up again, but Deshaun didn't flinch. He was speaking truth, and it stung. Jamal's gone, Deshaun continued. But you're still here. And it's about damn time you fight for yourself, not for him, not for anyone else. You've got to figure out who you are when no one's looking, when it's just you and your thoughts. That's the fight. Malik stood there, stunned, as Deshaun's words reverberated in his mind. Fight for himself. It was as though the world had been waiting for him to hear that one simple truth. But how could he fight for himself when all he had ever known was to fight for something else, someone else? Deshaun slapped him on the shoulder and walked away without another word, leaving Malik standing alone in the parking lot, the cool night air biting at his skin. Malik lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling of his small, dimly lit apartment. The events of the day replayed over and over in his mind, the fight with Devon, Deshaun's words, and the harsh reality that he had been running from his past for far too long. The adrenaline from the fight had worn off, leaving only a hollow feeling, as if he had accomplished nothing more than scratching the surface of something much deeper. For the first time in a long while, Malik didn't want to be in the gym. He didn't want to throw any more punches, to train for the next big fight. He didn't want the crowd or the attention. He just wanted to understand himself. He wanted to figure out who he was when he wasn't defined by the gloves, the bruises, and the wins. Deshaun's words echoed in his mind, "You're fighting for a whole lot of other people, Malik." He knew exactly who Deshaun was talking about. Jamal. His brother. The one who had always been there for him, the one who had pushed him to become the fighter he was today. But Jamal was gone. And Malik had never taken the time to truly process that loss. Instead, he had buried his emotions under layers of training, of competition, of victories and defeats. He had told himself that he couldn't stop, that he couldn't slow down, because if he did, the pain of losing Jamal would crush him. But that wasn't working anymore. Malik sat up in bed and swung his legs over the side, his feet touching the cold wooden floor. He stood slowly, rubbing his face as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. It wasn't just the fight that had shaken him, it was the realization that he was running away from everything that had shaped him, his brother's death, the struggles of growing up, the anger that had built up over the years. And no matter how many punches he threw, no matter how many rounds he won, none of that would ever be enough to fill the emptiness inside him. He had to face it. He had to face the past. Malik grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. The night was quiet, the streets empty as he walked through his neighborhood. The cool air bit at his skin, but he didn't mind. His thoughts were clouded, but they were clearer than they had been in months. He knew exactly where he had to go. The cemetery was only a few miles away, a place he had avoided since Jamal's funeral. It wasn't because he didn't want to remember his brother, it was because he didn't know how to face the reality of what had happened. The pain was too raw, too real. But tonight, Malik wasn't running. Tonight, he would confront it. The walk to the cemetery felt like an eternity. Every step he took, every turn he made, brought him closer to the place he had been avoiding. As he reached the gates, the moonlight cast long shadows over the rows of gravestones, the silence pressing in on him like a heavy weight. Malik stood at the entrance for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath came in shallow gasps. He didn't know what he was expecting, whether some grand revelation would come to him, or if he would simply be able to say goodbye to his brother. But he knew he couldn't keep running from this moment. He walked deeper into the cemetery, past rows of weathered headstones, each one marking a life that had come and gone. It was almost too much for Malik to bear. The thought that Jamal, the person who had always been there for him, was gone, was something he hadn't fully allowed himself to process. He had always kept going, kept fighting, kept pushing forward because it was the only way he knew how to survive. Finally, he reached the plot. The simple stone marker read, Jamal Carter, beloved brother and friend, with a date that still felt unreal to Malik. The weight of his grief hit him like a tidal wave, overwhelming him. He stood there for a long time, just staring at the stone, his chest tight with emotion. "I'm sorry, Jamal," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I never gave myself the chance to grieve. I was too focused on proving everyone wrong. But I've been running from it all. From you. From me." The tears came unexpectedly, hot and fast. Malik let them fall, not bothering to wipe them away. He had been holding on to this pain for so long, trying to keep it buried under the weight of his fight, but now it was impossible to keep it hidden. "I don't know how to do this without you, man," Malik continued, his voice breaking. "You were the one who always believed in me. You were the one who told me I could be more than just this, more than just the guy who throws punches. But I was scared. Scared of facing who I really am. Scared of letting go." He took a deep breath and knelt in front of the grave, his hands pressing into the cold earth beneath him. The weight of his words hung in the air, but there was something cathartic about finally acknowledging them. "I'm not gonna keep running anymore, Jamal," Malik said, his voice steadier now. "I'm gonna fight for myself. I'm gonna figure out who I am, not just who I want to be. I'll make you proud. I promise." He stayed there for a while longer, letting the quiet of the cemetery seep into his soul. The night was still, and for the first time in a long time, Malik felt at peace. When he finally stood up, his body felt lighter. He had come to terms with something important, something he had been avoiding for so long. He wasn't just a fighter. He wasn't just the guy who could throw a punch. He was more than that. And now he had the clarity to fight for something that truly mattered, himself. The walk back to his apartment was different. Malik felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. He had faced the past, and though it was painful, it had given him the strength to move forward. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but he was ready for them. He wasn't running anymore. As Malik entered his apartment, he took a deep breath and looked at himself in the mirror. It wasn't the same person he had been when he first started this journey. He had changed. He had finally begun to understand the fight wasn't just about victory or glory. It was about healing. About finding peace. The fight, the real fight, had only just begun. The next few days were a blur of reflection and recalibration. Malik spent less time in front of the mirror or obsessing over his punches, and more time within himself, searching for answers. He had spent years honing his physical strength, pushing his body to its limits, but he had neglected the most important element of all, his mind. For the first time in his life, Malik wasn't just fighting to get by. He wasn't trying to prove anything to the gym, to the other fighters, or to the world. He was fighting for himself. To reclaim his purpose. To understand his worth outside the ring. It wasn't just about boxing anymore, it was about life, the life he had avoided for so long. The next training session at the gym felt different from the others. As Malik entered, he noticed the usual crowd of eager fighters preparing for their workouts, their eyes occasionally glancing in his direction. But today, there was a change in the air, something subtle but undeniable. It was as if they could sense the shift in him, the quiet confidence he was starting to build. Ron was at the front of the gym, talking with a few of the other coaches. When he saw Malik enter, he gave him a nod, a gesture that felt more like an acknowledgement than the usual coaching drill. There was no need for words, just a look that said, "I see you. You're on the right track." Malik made his way to the punching bags, each step filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't here to fight for approval. He was here to rebuild. The bag, which had once been a target for his frustration, now felt like a tool for self-discovery. As his gloves made contact with the leather, he focused on his rhythm, his breathing, and most importantly, his thoughts. What do I really want? Malik's mind wandered back to that conversation with Deshaun at the cemetery. The words, "You're fighting for a whole lot of other people," rang out in his mind like a wake-up call. He had always believed that if he fought hard enough, if he pushed himself beyond the limit, the approval of others would fill the empty spaces inside him. But now he understood. That was never going to be enough. His fight had to come from a place deeper than validation. As he jabbed and crossed, each punch became more deliberate. His movements were no longer filled with aggression, but with intention. The noise of the gym faded into the background, and all that was left was the beat of his own heart and the sound of his gloves connecting with the bag. Ron stepped up beside him, watching Malik with quiet interest. "Feeling better?" he asked, his voice calm but full of knowing. Malik stopped, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to get it." Ron didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "It's not easy, Malik. But you've got the tools. Now it's time to start using them." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle into his chest. He had the tools. And now, it was time to put them to use. That afternoon, Malik stood in front of the mirror again, but this time, it was different. He wasn't trying to perfect his stance or criticize the flaws in his form. He was trying to see himself for who he truly was, without the layers of doubt and fear. The man who had stood in front of that same mirror years ago, unsure of his worth and his place in the world, was gone. In his place was someone more grounded, more self-aware. It wasn't about being the toughest guy in the room anymore. It wasn't about throwing the hardest punches. Malik realized now that his true strength came from his ability to be vulnerable, to face his past, and to embrace the journey he was on. His strength wasn't just in his fists, it was in his heart, his resilience, and his will to keep moving forward. The next few days were spent in the gym, not just training his body, but his mind as well. Malik spent time meditating before his workouts, focusing on clearing his head and reconnecting with himself. He worked with Ron on refining his technique, but he also learned to trust his instincts, to let go of the pressure of perfection, and to find joy in the process. For the first time, Malik started to see boxing for what it truly was, a way to express his inner strength, not a way to hide from the world. He could finally breathe again. The real test came a few days later during another sparring session. Malik's opponent was a newer fighter, Jared, a tall, lean guy who had been training at the gym for a few months. Jared was fast and light on his feet, a challenging opponent for anyone. As Malik stepped into the ring, the usual nerves crept up his spine, but this time, they weren't paralyzing. They were motivating. He could feel the energy of the gym humming in the background, the eyes of the other fighters watching, waiting to see how Malik would perform today. The bell rang, and the fight began. Jared came at him with speed, throwing quick jabs to test Malik's defenses. But this time, Malik wasn't distracted by the noise of the gym or the pressure to perform. His focus was laser-sharp, and he was in control. He moved smoothly, dodging Jared's punches, feeling each one before it landed and countering with calculated precision. Malik could feel the rhythm now, the flow of the fight. It wasn't just about dodging and attacking, it was about being present, about trusting his body to move in sync with his mind. Every punch, every dodge, every step was an extension of his newfound self. As the sparring session went on, Jared's movements slowed. He was trying to adjust, but Malik had already found his groove. With a calculated right hook, he landed a punch that sent Jared stumbling back. The force of the hit was enough to shake Jared's balance, and he had to quickly regain his footing. "Not bad, Malik," Ron called out from the sidelines, his voice filled with approval. Malik smiled, but there was no ego in it. This wasn't about winning or losing. This wasn't even about proving something to the gym or to himself. It was about finding peace in his body and mind. That night, as Malik sat on the edge of his bed, he reflected on the day's training. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the heavy weight of expectation on his shoulders. He had learned to focus, not just on the fight, but on what truly mattered. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. And Malik had finally started to understand what it meant to truly fight for himself. As he drifted off to sleep, the words Ron had said earlier that day echoed in his mind: "You've got the tools. Now it's time to start using them." And Malik knew, deep down, that the real fight was just beginning. Not in the ring, but within himself. Malik wasn't sure what to expect when he stepped into the gym the next morning, but something felt different. It wasn't the same energy he'd been used to, there was an undercurrent of something more. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that had settled in him since that day at the cemetery, or maybe it was the promise he'd made to himself. Either way, it felt like a new beginning. A second chance. Ron was already in the gym, his usual spot by the ring, observing the fighters as they warmed up. He nodded at Malik as he walked in, but there was no grand speech today, no additional words of wisdom. Ron simply gestured toward the ring. "Let's see what you've got," he said. The challenge in Ron's voice was subtle, but Malik could feel it in his bones. Today wasn't about the normal training. This was something more. This was the moment where he would see if his newfound focus was enough to carry him forward. There was no safety net, no buffer. It was just Malik and the fight. Malik pulled on his gloves, his hands tightening with each movement. The air in the gym was thick with anticipation as Ron called out the names for sparring. Today, he wasn't paired with someone he could easily handle. Today, he was matched with someone who would test him, a fighter who, like Malik, had been in the game for years. Deshaun. The moment Malik stepped into the ring with him, he knew this was a different kind of fight. Deshaun had always been a formidable opponent, but today, there was something in his eyes, a challenge, a test of Malik's resolve. Ready to put that new focus to the test? Deshaun asked, his voice calm but piercing. Malik nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. It wasn't just about proving himself anymore, it was about understanding how far he had come. He wasn't going to back down. The bell rang, and they were off. Deshaun's strikes were precise and calculated, pushing Malik back with each punch. But Malik wasn't panicking. The old Malik would have flinched, would have let his emotions dictate his movements. But this time, he was calm, his focus sharp. He wasn't just reacting, he was anticipating. He was feeling the rhythm of the fight before it even happened. Each time Deshaun advanced, Malik slipped and dodged, moving with a fluidity he hadn't felt before. When he saw an opening, he struck back, lightning-fast jabs that made Deshaun pause. This wasn't the Malik who had been humiliated in the past. This was a new version of himself, a fighter who was in control of his body, his mind, and his destiny. As the round progressed, Malik's confidence grew. He wasn't trying to outmuscle Deshaun or land the hardest blows. He was working with the flow of the fight, feeling the energy of the ring, and responding with precision. He had learned to trust his instincts, to follow the quiet whisper of his inner strength. The bell rang, signaling the end of the first round. Both fighters took a moment to catch their breath, but neither one of them broke eye contact. They were sizing each other up, but it wasn't about the physical strength anymore. It was about something deeper, something more foundational. "You're doing good, Malik," Deshaun said, his tone unexpectedly respectful. "But you've still got a lot to learn." Malik nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. He knew this wasn't a compliment for the sake of flattery. Deshaun was pushing him, testing his limits in a way that few others could. The second round began, and this time, Malik was ready. Deshaun's strikes came harder, faster, but Malik was prepared. He could feel the sweat dripping down his back, his muscles burning from the constant movement, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He wasn't fighting for anyone but himself now. And then, in the midst of it all, it happened. Deshaun lunged forward with a right hook that Malik knew was coming. In that instant, everything seemed to slow down. Malik saw the opening, and without thinking, he shifted his weight and threw a perfect counterpunch, a sharp, precise uppercut that landed cleanly against Deshaun's jaw. The sound of the punch hitting his opponent was sharp and clean, echoing through the gym. For a moment, everything went silent. Deshaun stumbled back, his eyes wide with surprise. Malik stood there, chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. Deshaun's face contorted for a split second, before he shook his head, disoriented. But it was clear that Malik had done what no one had expected. He had landed a punch that had the power to drop an 80-kilogram fighter. Malik had done it. Deshaun held up a hand, signaling the end of the sparring session, but there was no hostility in his movements. Instead, there was a nod of acknowledgement, a silent respect that passed between them. Deshaun wasn't angry. He wasn't ashamed. He understood. "You've got it, Malik," he said, his voice low but genuine. "You've finally figured it out." Malik stood there for a moment, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His heart was pounding, but it wasn't from fear or doubt. It was from the exhilaration of proving, not to the world, but to himself, that he was capable. That he could take control of his destiny. Ron walked up to the ring, his arms crossed over his chest, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That was some real work out there, Malik," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You've come a long way." Malik felt a rush of emotions, pride, relief, and most of all, gratitude. This was what he had been fighting for. Not just the victory in the ring, but the victory within himself. The road to redemption hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment. He had finally understood that the fight wasn't just about winning, it was about growth. It was about learning to face himself, to confront his past, and to embrace the person he was becoming. Malik wasn't the same guy who had walked into this gym all those months ago. He wasn't the same guy who had been humiliated or doubted. He was a new fighter now, one who could face anything the world threw at him. And it was only just beginning. Malik stepped into the gym the next morning with a new sense of purpose. The previous sparring session with Deshaun had been a turning point. Not only had he proven himself to others, but he had proven something even more significant to himself: he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. He wasn't just fighting for the approval of others anymore. He was fighting for his own growth, his own peace, and his own redemption. But the test wasn't over. As much as Malik wanted to savor the victory, he knew there was still more to come. That's how life worked. Each victory, no matter how sweet, was followed by another hurdle. This time, it wasn't about learning how to handle his emotions or mastering the basics. This time, the test would come from someone who had been eyeing Malik's progress for a while. As Malik walked through the doors of the gym, he noticed a group of fighters gathered near the ring, whispering to each other. His curiosity piqued, he walked over, trying to catch snippets of their conversation. "Have you seen the new guy?" one of the fighters asked, his voice laced with awe. "Yeah, he's a beast," another replied. "Apparently, he's undefeated." Malik raised an eyebrow. He had heard rumors about this new fighter, but he hadn't seen him in person yet. The name that kept coming up was James, an imposing figure with a reputation for knocking out anyone who stepped in the ring with him. The kind of fighter who made veterans think twice before accepting a challenge. Just then, James walked into the gym. He was taller than Malik by a few inches, with broad shoulders and a muscular build that looked like it had been carved from stone. His presence was undeniable, it was as if the room itself shifted when he entered. His reputation had preceded him, and the moment his eyes met Malik's, there was no mistaking it, this was the fight Malik had been waiting for. Ron, who had been watching from the sidelines, called out to Malik. "You're up. James is here for a sparring match. Think you're ready?" Malik felt the weight of the question. Was he ready? He had come a long way, but James wasn't just another sparring partner. James was the real deal, a test of Malik's newfound strength and focus. But it wasn't a matter of being physically ready anymore. It was about trusting in everything he had learned, about staying calm under pressure and trusting his instincts. Malik nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'm ready." The crowd of fighters parted as James and Malik stepped into the ring. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that this match would be more than just a sparring session, it would be a test of Malik's true potential. As the bell rang, James came at Malik with a ferocity that surprised even him. His punches were fast, precise, and heavy. The first few jabs came so quickly that Malik barely had time to react. He blocked one punch but missed another, the force of it grazing his cheek. He felt the sting, but he didn't let it shake him. This wasn't the time to back down. Malik knew he had to stay composed, to wait for the right moment to strike back. He had been here before, his back against the wall, unsure of how to survive. But now, he had a different mindset. This fight was his opportunity to prove that all the struggles, all the hardships, had led him to this moment. James threw a vicious uppercut, and Malik narrowly avoided it, stepping to the side. He could feel the power in James's strikes, the weight behind each punch. But instead of panicking, Malik focused on his breathing. He centered himself, clearing his mind of all distractions. This wasn't just about physical strength, it was about mental clarity. For the first time, Malik didn't feel the need to overpower James. Instead, he began to think about the rhythm of the fight, the ebb and flow, the patterns, the openings. His body started moving without hesitation. He dodged, ducked, and weaved, his movements becoming fluid, a dance of strategy and precision. Then, just as James swung a wild right hook, Malik saw it, an opening. He stepped forward, leaning into the punch, and with all his strength, delivered a counterpunch to James's midsection. The impact was solid, and for a split second, Malik saw James falter. But James wasn't out of the fight yet. He regained his balance almost immediately and came back even harder. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. James was relentless, throwing combination after combination, trying to break through Malik's defense. Malik's arms were starting to feel heavy, his body aching from the constant movement, but he kept pushing forward. He couldn't afford to let up, not now. The fight wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving that he had the mental and emotional strength to endure, to fight through the pain, and to stay focused. The crowd around the ring was growing louder, the intensity of the fight feeding their energy. Malik could hear Ron's voice, calm and steady, cutting through the noise. "Stay focused, Malik. Don't rush it. You've got this." Malik didn't let the pressure get to him. He took a deep breath and refocused. He could feel his instincts kicking in, guiding him like they had in the past. He moved with the rhythm of the fight, blocking and countering with precision. And then, in a moment of clarity, Malik saw his opening. James's guard dropped slightly after a combination, and Malik knew this was his moment. With a swift move, Malik landed a clean jab to James's face, followed by a powerful right cross that sent James stumbling back. For the first time in the fight, James hesitated. Malik's heart raced as he saw his opponent recover, but he could see it in James's eyes, the moment of doubt. It wasn't over yet, but Malik knew he had found his stride. "Nice shot," James said, wiping the blood from his lip, his tone now tinged with respect. Malik didn't respond with words. His actions spoke for him. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to show that he had earned his place in this gym, in this fight, and in his own life. The round ended, and both fighters stepped back to their corners. Sweat dripped down Malik's face, his muscles burning from the exertion, but his mind was clear. He had weathered the storm. He had taken the punches and stood strong, and now, he could feel the shift. This fight wasn't about the victory, it was about the journey. As the bell rang again for the next round, Malik looked across the ring at James. The respect in his eyes was mutual. They both knew this fight wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of willpower. And Malik had passed that test. Malik walked out of the gym, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration that he had never experienced before. The fight with James had been grueling, and though it wasn't an official match, the energy in the gym had made it feel like one. As he stepped into the cool evening air, he felt a sense of accomplishment, but beneath that, there was a nagging feeling, one that had been growing inside of him for weeks now. Victory had come at a price, and Malik wasn't sure if he was ready to pay it. Since that day in the ring, he had felt a shift in the way people looked at him. There were no more whispers of doubt, no more sneers or judgmental stares. Instead, people respected him. They saw him as a serious contender, someone to watch, someone who had proven himself in a way that was undeniable. But the respect came with an unspoken burden, a pressure to keep winning, to keep proving himself worthy of the title that others had bestowed upon him. Malik knew how fragile this newfound status was. He had worked hard for it, had fought through the lows, the doubts, and the humiliation, but now that he had earned the respect, he realized that the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. There was a constant expectation to live up to his new identity as a fighter. There was no room for mistakes, no room for weakness. And that scared him. As Malik walked to his car, his mind replayed the fight with James over and over again. It had been a defining moment, but the victory had left him wondering, what next? He had finally stepped up, faced a true test, and survived. But was that enough? Was winning all that mattered, or was there something more to this journey? He shook his head as he slid into the driver's seat. He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear, he couldn't let the pressure crush him. He couldn't let the expectations of others dictate his path. This was his journey, and it had to be for him, not for anyone else. The next few days were a blur of interviews, messages from other fighters, and constant reminders of his new status in the gym. Everywhere he went, people congratulated him, asked for advice, or simply wanted to shake his hand. It felt good at first. It felt like all his hard work had finally paid off, but the weight of the expectations was starting to wear on him. Ron had pulled him aside the morning after the fight with James. "You did good, Malik," Ron said, his voice steady but serious. "But remember, you're not just fighting in the gym anymore. You've got a reputation now. People are going to challenge you more. And the stakes are higher." Malik nodded, trying to digest what Ron was telling him. The thought of taking on bigger challenges didn't scare him. It was the idea of what would happen if he lost, if he failed to live up to the hype, that made his stomach churn. "I know," Malik said quietly. "But I'm not sure if I can handle the pressure, Ron. It's different now. Everyone expects me to keep winning, to keep proving that I'm good enough." Ron gave him a pointed look. "Listen to me, Malik. You've earned your place here. You've proven yourself. But the real test isn't just about winning. It's about dealing with the pressure when things get tough. There will be times when you'll feel like you're drowning in it, but that's when you need to remember why you're here. This journey, it's about growth. Not just as a fighter, but as a person. You have to find a balance, or the pressure will consume you." Malik absorbed his words, the weight of them sinking in. He had always known that boxing was more than just about the fight. It was about mental strength, about resilience. But now that he was in the thick of it, the reality was hitting him harder than ever before. As the days passed, Malik continued to train, but the joy he once felt in the ring had started to slip away. Every punch, every movement, felt like it was under a microscope. The eyes of the gym were always on him, waiting for him to slip, for him to falter. His once carefree approach to the sport had become clouded by doubt and fear of failure. He no longer just wanted to win, he needed to win. For himself, for the people who believed in him, and for those who had doubted him. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Malik found himself in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His hands were raw, his muscles sore, and his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Is this what I wanted? he thought. Is this the cost of success? He ran a hand through his damp hair and sighed. The pressure was getting to him. It wasn't just about fighting anymore, it was about surviving the weight of his own expectations. He had been pushed to the limit and beyond, and now, it was starting to feel like he was losing a piece of himself in the process. He wasn't sure if he could handle it. He wasn't sure if he could keep up the facade of being the strong, confident fighter everyone expected him to be. The truth was, there were moments when he didn't feel strong. There were moments when he felt like breaking down, like giving up, but he couldn't. Not now. Not when he had come so far. He grabbed his gym bag, throwing it over his shoulder, and made his way to the exit. He needed a break, time to clear his head and reflect on what had been happening. The pressure was becoming unbearable, and he knew he couldn't face it alone. Later that night, Malik found himself walking along the quiet streets of his neighborhood, his thoughts still swirling. It was peaceful here, away from the gym, away from the constant demands. As he walked, he thought about his family, his mom, his little sister, his friends. They had all supported him through this journey, but they didn't understand the weight he was carrying. They didn't know what it felt like to be constantly under the spotlight, to have everyone expect perfection. He stopped at the corner of the street and stared out into the distance, the city lights flickering like stars in the night sky. For the first time in a while, Malik allowed himself to breathe. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a person. Someone who had flaws, doubts, and fears. But that didn't mean he wasn't worthy of success. As the cool breeze ruffled his hair, Malik made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't going to let the pressure break him. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his journey. No matter what happened, he would keep fighting, not just in the ring, but for himself. The days following Malik's walk through the streets of his neighborhood were filled with an unsettling stillness. He had taken time to reflect, to find peace in the quiet spaces between the chaos of the gym and the constant pressure to prove himself. But even in that stillness, he knew there was no escaping the inevitable. The world of boxing didn't wait. Opportunities didn't pause. The fight was always coming, and Malik knew he had to prepare, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And now, it was here. Malik had received an invitation that morning, an official offer to compete in the next big amateur boxing event, one that would determine the rising stars of the city. It wasn't just any match. It was the kind of fight that would put his name on the map, the kind of fight where scouts and trainers would be watching, assessing every move, every punch. It was the kind of fight that could launch him into the next level, or break him completely. The weight of it hit Malik like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just another sparring session or a training drill. This was the moment he had been working toward, the moment that could change everything. But with that realization came a new wave of pressure. The fear that had been lingering in his mind resurfaced. Could he handle it? Could he truly live up to the expectation everyone had for him? Ron could sense the doubt in Malik's eyes when he walked into the gym later that day. The invitation was in his hand, crumpled at the edges as Malik stared at it, his heart heavy with uncertainty. "What's going on, Malik?" Ron asked, leaning against the wall. "You look like you just got hit by a truck." Malik didn't immediately respond. He glanced down at the invitation again, feeling the weight of it. It was more than just a chance to fight, it was a chance to prove everything, not just to the gym, but to himself. To show that he could take on the world, that he could stand tall despite the doubts that had crept into his mind. "I don't know if I'm ready, Ron," Malik admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been training hard, but this is different. It feels like the whole world is watching, waiting for me to fall." Ron walked over to him, taking a seat beside Malik on the bench. "You're always going to feel like the world's watching, Malik. But you've already shown that you can handle pressure. You didn't just survive in that ring with James, you thrived. And you didn't just beat Deshaun, you made a statement." Malik glanced at Ron, his brow furrowed. "But what if I fail? What if I get knocked out in the first round?" What if I can't handle the pressure when it matters most? Ron smiled, a knowing smile. Malik, listen to me. The true test isn't whether you win or lose. It's about how you handle the pressure when it feels like you can't go on. You've been through too much already to back down now. Don't let fear of failure control you. The real fight begins when you decide to step into the ring. It's not about the results, it's about the courage to keep fighting, no matter what happens. The words hit Malik like a punch to the chest. He knew Ron was right. He had been afraid of failure all his life, afraid of not measuring up, afraid of not being good enough. But now, he had to let go of that fear. The world didn't expect perfection. It expected resilience. It expected someone who could rise, even when the odds were stacked against them. Malik stood up from the bench, his fists clenched at his sides. I'm in. I'm going to take the fight. Ron nodded approvingly. That's what I want to hear. You've got the skills, Malik. You've got the heart. Now it's time to show the world who you are. The days leading up to the fight were a blur of intense training. Malik's focus had sharpened. The fear, the doubt, he didn't have time for them anymore. His mind was consumed by the fight ahead. Every punch, every drill, every run was a step toward proving that he could handle the pressure, that he could rise to the challenge. But as the fight date approached, the pressure was harder to ignore. The gym became a different place for Malik. It wasn't just a space for training anymore. It was the stage where everything would be decided. The ring would become his proving ground. The fight was no longer just a fight, it was his moment of truth. On the night before the fight, Malik couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, his mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. What if his opponent was too strong? What if he froze under the lights? What if, after everything, he couldn't live up to the hype? His phone buzzed on the nightstand, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from his sister, Alicia. I know you're nervous, but you've got this, Malik. We all believe in you. Just remember, be yourself. The rest will follow. Malik smiled, reading the message over and over. Her words brought a calmness he hadn't realized he needed. It was simple, but it was exactly what he needed to hear, be yourself. In that moment, he realized that all the pressure, all the expectations, they didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was trusting in himself and his ability to fight. He wasn't fighting for anyone else. He was fighting for the person he was becoming, strong, resilient, and unafraid of the challenges ahead. The next morning, Malik stepped into the gym one last time before the fight. He wasn't just preparing his body, he was preparing his mind. He was focused, determined, and ready. When he walked into the ring later that evening, he wasn't going to just fight. He was going to prove to himself that he could face anything that came his way. As he entered the arena, the buzz of excitement in the air was palpable. There were spectators, trainers, and other fighters, all eager to see what Malik could do. The pressure was intense, but Malik felt it in a way that he hadn't before. This wasn't about fear or failure. This was about being the person he had always wanted to become. The crowd roared as Malik stepped into the ring, the spotlight casting a sharp glow on him. His heart pounded in his chest, but for the first time in what felt like weeks, the pressure wasn't suffocating him, it was energizing him. This was it. This was the moment that could define everything. Across the ring stood his opponent, a fighter Malik had watched from afar. His name was Chris Simmons, a beast of a man, built like a tank with broad shoulders, powerful arms, and an intimidating stare. Chris was a seasoned fighter, known for his ruthless speed and sheer strength. He was everything Malik wasn't. Tall, heavy-set, and with the kind of raw power that could knock out anyone in a single punch. But Malik didn't feel intimidated. No, not anymore. He had spent the last few days preparing mentally for this moment, and as he stood there, looking across the ring, something clicked inside him. This wasn't about Chris. This wasn't about the crowd. This was about Malik. This was about the fighter he was becoming. "Remember what we talked about," Ron's voice echoed in his head. "You're not fighting for them, Malik. You're fighting for you." The bell rang. The crowd's noise blurred into the background, and all Malik could hear was the rhythm of his breath. The first round was always the most crucial. It was the chance to feel out his opponent, to test the waters. He wasn't going to rush. He wasn't going to go in swinging wildly. He was going to be strategic, smart, and patient. This was his time to prove that he belonged here, in the big leagues, with the best of them. Chris came out strong, launching into a series of jabs with surprising speed for a man his size. Malik easily dodged the first few, moving around the ring, staying light on his feet. He could feel the power behind Chris's punches, but he knew the key to winning wasn't brute force, it was endurance and timing. Malik slid to his left, evading another jab, and countered with a right hook aimed at Chris's midsection. It landed cleanly, but Chris barely flinched. Malik knew this was going to be harder than he thought. Chris had the kind of build that absorbed punishment like a wall. It was going to take more than just a couple of good hits to break him down. But that's when Malik remembered what Ron had told him: the true test isn't just about the physical fight. It's about mental strength. He didn't need to beat Chris in the first round. He needed to prove that he could take whatever came his way. Chris pressed forward, growing more aggressive with each punch. The force of his blows seemed to shake the air itself. Malik ducked under a powerful left hook and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a vicious right hand that could have sent him to the mat. His heart was racing, but he kept his focus. He wasn't afraid. He was in control. As they continued to trade blows, Malik's confidence grew. He wasn't getting hit as much as he thought he would. His footwork was on point, his timing sharp. He was starting to understand Chris's rhythm, how he moved, how he reacted to certain feints. Every time Malik threw a jab, Chris seemed to get just a little slower in his response. That was the crack in the armor. Malik had found it. With seconds left in the first round, Malik saw his opening. Chris was coming in strong, his guard dropping slightly as he reached for a punch. In that split second, Malik seized the opportunity. He slid to his left, just out of Chris's reach, and then, with everything he had, he threw a left jab followed by a clean right cross, right to Chris's jaw. The punch landed with an unmistakable thud. Chris staggered, his legs giving way for a brief moment. The crowd gasped, the sound of their shock reverberating through the gym. Malik couldn't believe it. Chris, the powerhouse of a fighter, had been rocked. Malik stayed poised, watching Chris closely. The bigger fighter tried to regain his footing, but Malik was already moving in. He knew this was the moment. He couldn't hesitate. He couldn't show fear. Chris launched himself back into the fight, desperate to regain control. But Malik, like a machine, was relentless. He followed up with a series of sharp jabs, pushing Chris back toward the ropes. With every punch, Malik could see Chris tiring. The weight of the bigger man's punches was starting to slow him down, but Malik's speed and precision were keeping him on the defensive. The bell rang, signaling the end of the first round. Malik stepped back to his corner, his breath heavy, but his mind sharp. He was winning, but he knew the second round would be even tougher. Chris was a fighter. He wasn't going to give up that easily. Malik had only one shot at taking him down. "Nice work, kid," Ron said, a slight smile on his face. "You've got him where you want him. Keep doing what you're doing, don't let up." Malik nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I've got this. I can feel it." The second round started with a renewed intensity. Chris had recovered from the punch, but the damage was done. His confidence had shaken, and Malik could sense it. He was no longer just reacting, he was in control, moving as if he had known the outcome from the moment the bell had rung. Every time Chris tried to swing, Malik was already a step ahead, slipping out of range, hitting him with jabs that kept him off balance. It was clear that Malik's earlier assessment had been correct. Chris relied heavily on his strength, but without the speed to match, he was now vulnerable. Malik could feel the shift in the energy of the fight. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. In the final seconds of the second round, Malik threw everything he had into a final combination, a quick jab to Chris's stomach, followed by a right hook that sent Chris crashing to the mat. The crowd erupted in a deafening cheer. The ring had become a blur of sweat, blood, and adrenaline. Malik's pulse hammered in his ears as he stood over Chris, watching him struggle to push himself back up from the mat. The crowd's roar was deafening, but in that moment, Malik was in a world of his own. His focus was razor-sharp, his body buzzing with energy. He knew this was his moment. Everything he had worked for, every sacrifice, every drop of sweat in training, had led him to this point. But now came the hardest part, the finish. Chris's legs wobbled as he attempted to stand, his hands bracing the ropes. The referee stood by, counting down, but there was something in his stance, something that told Malik Chris wouldn't get up this time. He was spent. Malik could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the same look he had seen in the mirror so many times before he had decided to push forward. 10. The referee's voice rang out, a countdown that stretched into eternity. Malik felt his breath slow as he stepped back, his mind racing through the seconds. This wasn't just a physical fight anymore. This was everything, the culmination of every moment of doubt, every setback, every moment of humiliation. And now, with one final punch, it could all end. 6. 7. The referee's count continued, but Malik wasn't watching Chris anymore. He was watching himself, mentally preparing for what he had to do. 8. Chris was struggling, his movements sluggish, his eyes glazed. It was clear he wouldn't make it back to his feet. Malik's coach, Ron, had drilled into him over the last few weeks that there would be moments like this, when the opponent wouldn't just give up easily. But it wasn't about who could outlast the other physically. It was about who had the mental strength to finish what they started. Stay calm, stay sharp, Malik whispered to himself. The countdown reached 10, and the referee's hand shot up. Chris was down for the count. The fight was over. The bell rang, marking the end of the second round. The referee stepped between Malik and Chris, signaling the end of the fight. Malik didn't feel the rush of victory at first. He stood there, barely breathing, his mind still processing everything that had just happened. He had won. He had knocked out an 80 kilograms fighter, a man who had years of experience over him, and the crowd knew it. The deafening roar of cheers filled the arena, but all Malik could hear was his own heartbeat. And then, the realization hit him. He had done it. He had taken the hit, survived the pressure, and delivered when it mattered most. It wasn't just about the knockout, it was about the strength he had found within himself, the belief that he could do it, even when the world thought he couldn't. Ron was at his side in an instant, slapping him on the back. "You did it, Malik. I knew you had it in you." Malik barely registered the words, still in disbelief. It was like the world had slowed down for a moment. The lights above the ring blurred, the crowd's cheers fading into a distant echo. He turned toward Chris, who was still on the mat, slowly starting to rise. It wasn't a complete victory for him, not yet. He had knocked Chris down, but Chris wasn't completely out. There was still respect between them. There had to be. The referee waved the medical staff in to check on Chris, but Malik didn't leave the ring. He stood there, his fists raised in the air, his body sore but strong. His eyes scanned the crowd, a quiet triumph building within him. And then he saw it. In the front row, his family was standing, cheering him on. His sister Alicia, his mom, and even his old friends from the neighborhood. They had all come to see him fight, to see if the boy they once knew could stand tall and claim a victory. His mom's face beamed with pride, her eyes filled with tears. He knew then that it wasn't just about this fight. It was about showing them, and himself, that no matter where he came from, he could make it. Chris was finally on his feet, nodding to the referee that he was okay to continue. The fight was over, but the respect between the two fighters was clear. Chris, despite the loss, gave Malik a nod of acknowledgement. Malik returned the gesture, a silent understanding passing between them. They were both fighters, and in that moment, Malik knew he had earned his place among them. The official announcement came next, loud and clear through the speakers: winner by knockout, Malik "the Phoenix" Johnson. The crowd erupted once more in cheers as Malik raised his fists in the air, but the victory wasn't just for the audience, it was for him. It was for every moment of doubt he had faced, for every challenge he had overcome. It was the moment he proved he wasn't just the kid who had been humiliated in boxing class. He wasn't just the underdog. He was a champion. As the adrenaline began to fade, Malik's mind started to clear. He was tired, his body sore, but it wasn't the physical pain that consumed him now. It was the sense of accomplishment, the quiet pride that came from knowing that he had crossed the line between who he was and who he could be. But the fight wasn't over, not yet. The victory felt sweet, but Malik knew this was only the beginning. He had a long way to go before he could truly say he had mastered the ring. But this was the first step. He had shown himself, and everyone else, that he wasn't just a boxer. He was a force to be reckoned with. The gym was buzzing with excitement, but for Malik, everything had gone quiet. His victory was already being talked about, but all he could focus on was the weight of what had just happened. The cheers from the crowd still echoed in his ears, but they felt distant. The sensation of having knocked out Chris Simmons, the powerful, seasoned fighter, was sinking in, but the reality of the moment was overwhelming in a way he hadn't expected. He sat on the edge of the ring, sweat still dripping from his brow. His body ached, but there was something deeper now, a tiredness in his chest that came not from physical exertion, but from the mental exhaustion of what had just transpired. His thoughts were racing. The victory felt surreal, as though it were someone else's moment, not his. The crowd continued to cheer, and though it was for him, he couldn't quite process the magnitude of it. The boxing world had just witnessed a debut, a statement. And Malik knew that this wasn't going to be just another win, it would change his life forever. He wasn't the underdog anymore. He wasn't just the kid who had struggled to find his place in this world. Now, he was Malik, the Phoenix Johnson, the fighter who had knocked out an 80 kilograms champion. A part of him wondered if he was ready for everything this victory would bring. Great job, Malik. Ron's voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. Malik looked up to see his coach standing over him, a grin plastered across his face. You've just proven something to yourself. And to everyone else. Malik managed a tired smile. I didn't expect it to happen this fast, he admitted. Ron chuckled. No one ever does. But that's why you were ready. You've been training for this, even when you didn't know it. The words hit Malik in ways he wasn't prepared for. You've been training for this, even when you didn't know it. The weight of those words sank in. He hadn't just been training for the fight. He had been training for this moment of self-discovery, for the realization that his past struggles weren't setbacks, they were the very things that had made him strong. The pain he'd felt, the doubt he had carried, and the way he had been overlooked, those were the things that had sharpened his resolve. But as he sat there, soaking in the aftermath, another realization dawned on him: what now? What did this victory mean for his future? The aftermath of victory was never as clear-cut as it seemed. The applause and recognition from the crowd felt hollow compared to the battle he had just fought within himself. He had overcome his biggest mental hurdle, doubt, but what about the next fight? Would he be able to handle the pressure that came with success? Would he continue to grow? Or would the expectations placed on him become a weight too heavy to carry? Ron slapped him on the back, shaking him out of his thoughts. We've got work to do. This is only the beginning, Malik. The real challenge starts now. People are going to start paying attention to you. They'll want more. You'll have to give them more. Malik nodded, pushing himself off the canvas. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, and his body was sore. But his mind was alive, constantly processing, constantly searching for meaning. As he walked out of the ring, the gym was full of people coming up to congratulate him. Fellow boxers, coaches, even the ones who had watched him struggle in the early days. They all saw him now, not just as the new kid in class, but as someone who had earned his place. It was overwhelming. And yet, Malik knew this wasn't the time to rest on his laurels. He had been given an opportunity to prove that this wasn't just a one-time fluke. It was his moment to rise, to show the world who Malik, the Phoenix Johnson really was. The next few days were a whirlwind. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of congratulations, reporters asking for interviews, and fans who had heard about his knockout. Malik had never imagined something like this. He had been the quiet kid, the one who worked in the shadows, and now he was in the spotlight, a fighter with something to prove. But amidst the glitz and the media circus, there were moments of solitude. Malik would find himself in his room at night, sitting in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of the person who had just accomplished something huge. It wasn't that he didn't feel proud of himself, but it was hard to reconcile this new identity with the boy he used to be. Was he really the fighter they all claimed he was? Or was he still that same insecure, unsure kid who had been humiliated in boxing class all those months ago? The questions kept swirling around him. And yet, despite the chaos around him, Malik felt a fire inside that he hadn't felt before. He knew this wasn't the end. The fame, the recognition, the praise, those were just temporary. But what he had learned about himself, what he had discovered in that ring, was real. And that, more than anything else, was what he had to hold on to. "I've got to stay grounded," Malik whispered to himself one night as he sat on his bed, looking at the boxing gloves hanging on the wall. "I've got to remember who I am." But as much as he tried to stay humble, he couldn't ignore the change that was happening within him. The world was starting to see him for who he truly was. A champion. And that, Malik knew, was something that no one could ever take away from him. Malik's phone buzzed incessantly as he walked down the street, the flashing screen offering a never-ending stream of notifications. It was overwhelming. In the days following his knockout victory, the world had changed in a way he hadn't quite anticipated. The media frenzy had escalated, reporters were calling him non-stop, and even strangers on the street recognized him now. "Yo, that was a hell of a punch," a guy shouted from across the sidewalk, his voice carrying above the hum of the city. Malik offered a small nod in return, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him, something he hadn't fully processed yet. The accolades were there, he could hear them in the voice messages, see them in the social media posts, feel them in the handshakes and pats on the back. But it didn't feel as satisfying as he thought it would. In fact, the weight of it all was starting to crush him. He walked into the gym, the place that had been his sanctuary, where he had trained tirelessly for months. Today, it felt different. The usual hum of people sparring, hitting the bags, and pushing each other was still there, but it was quieter for him. The familiar faces of his teammates now seemed distant, almost unfamiliar. There was a subtle shift in the way they looked at him, respect, yes, but something else too. An expectation. "Malik. You're the man." Ron called out as he saw him enter. He gave Malik a slap on the back that echoed through the gym, but there was an odd tension in the air. Ron's grin was genuine, but there was something in his eyes, something Malik had never seen before. It was pride, sure, but also, a kind of pressure. Malik had won, but winning had its price. And now, that price was becoming more and more apparent. The phone calls, the media requests, the interviews, it was all a lot to handle. There was no downtime, no chance to breathe and reflect. Everywhere he went, there were people expecting him to perform, to live up to the hype. The pressure was suffocating. The noise, the expectations, it was like trying to swim with weights tied to his ankles. "Alright, champ. Let's see what you've got today," Ron said, clapping his hands together. "We've got work to do if you're going to keep this momentum rolling." Malik nodded, though his heart wasn't in it. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up this facade of being the confident fighter everyone thought he was. Because deep down, he was starting to feel more like a machine, a tool in the media circus, a pawn in a game that wasn't entirely his. Later that night, Malik sat in his apartment, staring at the TV screen. The flashing images of his knockout replayed over and over again, as commentators praised him for his strength, his technique, and his undeniable talent. But the praise felt hollow. His phone sat beside him, buzzing again, but this time, he ignored it. He had become a spectacle. His life was no longer his own. The world had claimed him, and now they all had an opinion about what he should be, what he should do next. In the past, he had fought for himself, for survival, for respect, for a place in the world. But now, he was fighting for something else entirely. The pressure to maintain this persona was beginning to wear on him. His body was tired, but his mind was exhausted. It was starting to feel like the weight of the world was on his shoulders, and every punch he threw now came with a cost. The people around him were quick to offer their congratulations, but no one seemed to understand the reality of what he was going through. Not his family. Not Ron. Not even the fans who cheered his name. They all wanted more from him. Everyone expected him to win again. And again. But what if he couldn't? What if the next fight didn't go his way? Would he still be seen as the same champion? These were the thoughts that kept him up at night. The next morning, Malik walked into the gym, trying to shake off the weight of his doubts. But the second he stepped through the doors, he felt it again, the eyes on him. The whispers. The expectations. He was supposed to be the best. He was supposed to keep winning. But what if he couldn't? What if the pressure broke him? "Yo, Malik, how's it feel to be a legend already?" one of the other boxers, Jason, called out as he passed by. Malik forced a smile. "It's a lot to take in," he replied, trying to keep his tone light. Ron approached him, a clipboard in hand. "Alright, champ. We've got a few things to go over. The media is getting crazy, and we need to keep you focused on the next fight. You've got a lot of eyes on you now. You need to be ready." Malik nodded, though he wasn't sure if he could keep up the pace. The media circus, the constant interviews, the expectations, it was all starting to feel like too much. "I'm ready," Malik said, though even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. Ron gave him a sharp look, his eyes narrowing. "Listen, Malik, I know you've been through a lot, but now is when you need to dig in. This isn't just about one fight. This is about your career. You've got the talent, but it's the mental game that'll make or break you." The words hit Malik harder than Ron could have known. It wasn't just about winning. It was about surviving in this world where everyone expected something from him, where everyone was waiting for him to fall. Later that evening, Malik took a walk through the city streets, trying to clear his mind. The neon lights of downtown flickered above him, the sounds of traffic and distant chatter filling the air. The city had always been a place of freedom for him, a place where he could escape his doubts and just breathe. But now, even the city felt heavy. Every street corner, every face that passed by, it all felt like a reminder that he was no longer just Malik Johnson. He was Malik, the Phoenix Johnson, the fighter who had knocked out a heavyweight champion. The pressure was mounting. And with it came the fear of failure. The fear that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't ready for all of this. "Malik." A voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see his sister, Alicia, rushing toward him. "Hey, what's up?" Malik said, offering a small smile. Alicia gave him a look, clearly seeing the exhaustion in his eyes. "You good? You don't look so hot." Malik sighed. "It's just, a lot, you know, This whole thing. I thought it was going to feel different. Alicia nodded, her expression softening. I get it. But you've got this. You've always been strong. Just remember, it's okay to take a step back sometimes. Malik looked at her, grateful for the reminder. Maybe he didn't have to carry it all on his own. Maybe, just maybe, it was okay to lean on the people who cared about him. He wasn't alone in this. Thanks, Alicia, he said, his voice softening. I needed to hear that. As they stood there, amidst the bustle of the city, Malik felt a small sense of clarity. The road ahead would be hard. The pressure would continue to build. But he wasn't alone. He had his family. He had his coach. He had himself. And maybe that was enough. Malik stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection that seemed almost foreign to him now. He was wearing his fight gear, the gloves laced tightly, his eyes sharp with focus, but underneath it all, there was something different about him. The boy who had first walked into the gym, uncertain and eager to prove himself, now stood as a fighter who had already knocked out one of the toughest in the ring. The weight of that victory still lingered, but with it came something far heavier, the pressure to live up to it. It was fight night again, and this time, it wasn't just any fight. This was the one that everyone had been waiting for. The one that would define Malik's career. His opponent was no slouch, Jared, the Beast, Cooper, a fighter with a reputation as brutal as his name. The man was known for his raw power, his ability to knock out opponents with a single blow. And now, Malik was going to face him. The arena was packed, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Malik could hear the crowds roar even before he stepped into the ring. It felt like a sea of voices crashing against him, each one demanding something from him. But unlike his previous fight, where he had been the underdog, tonight he was the champion they all expected to keep winning. Focus, Malik. Just like we practiced, Ron's voice echoed through his mind. The simple mantra was supposed to calm him, but it only highlighted the growing storm inside. He wasn't just fighting Jared tonight, he was fighting every expectation placed on him since that first victory. The bright lights of the arena blurred around him, and his mind flashed back to the early days of training, to the moment when he had doubted everything. The moment when the weight of the world had seemed too much. But now, he was the one everyone was looking to for answers. He was the one they believed could defy the odds. Malik Johnson, everyone. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, and Malik's name was met with thunderous applause. But in the midst of the cheers, Malik couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it wasn't enough. He wasn't sure he was ready for what was about to happen. All right, champ, it's time, Ron said, placing a firm hand on Malik's shoulder. His eyes were serious, but there was a quiet confidence in them that Malik wished he could replicate. As he walked to the ring, Malik could feel every eye on him. The familiar faces, the reporters, the fans, they were all expecting greatness. But Malik knew what they didn't. This fight wasn't just about boxing. It was about proving something to himself. It was about overcoming the fear that had gnawed at him since his victory. Fear of failure, fear of the future, fear of losing everything he had fought so hard to gain. The bell rang, and the crowd fell into a hush. Jared Cooper stood across the ring, his stance wide and imposing, muscles rippling under the bright lights. The man was a powerhouse, and his fists were legendary. His eyes locked onto Malik with a predatory intensity, as though he could already taste the victory. He knew that Malik was the rising star, the one everyone wanted to see fall. And Jared wasn't going to let him get away without a fight. The first few rounds were a blur. Jared came out swinging, his punches powerful and fast, each one landing with a thud that sent shockwaves through Malik's body. Malik's head snapped back, and his vision blurred momentarily. He fought to stay focused, moving around the ring, ducking and weaving, trying to find his rhythm. The pressure of the moment was unbearable. Each punch that Jared landed felt like it was testing Malik's resolve. The doubts crept in again, was I really cut out for this? Am I strong enough to survive this? Malik's legs felt heavy, his breath shallow. But as the seconds ticked by, something inside him shifted. The voices in his head, the doubts, they all started to fade. He had come too far to back down now. Then, in the third round, it happened. Jared wound up for a massive right hook that Malik knew was coming from a mile away. It was a move that had knocked out countless fighters, but Malik was ready. With a calmness that surprised him, he dodged the punch at the last second and, in one fluid motion, countered. His fist flew out with lightning speed, and as if time had slowed, Malik could see the exact moment his punch landed. The impact was immediate, the sound of flesh meeting bone ringing through the arena. Jared staggered back, his eyes wide in disbelief. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog that had settled in. But it was too late. Malik saw the opening, and with one more punch, a quick jab to the chin, Jared crumpled to the canvas. The referee's count echoed in Malik's ears, but all he could hear was the deafening silence that followed. The world seemed to stand still. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the crowd erupted in a roar so loud it made the floor shake. Malik stood over Jared, his chest heaving with exertion. He wasn't sure whether to feel exhilarated or terrified. Had he really just knocked out one of the most feared fighters in the ring? The feeling of the punch, the power, the precision, the complete control, was something he had never experienced before. But it wasn't just the punch. It wasn't just the victory. It was the realization that Malik had finally done it, he had faced the pressure, faced the man who was supposed to destroy him, and come out on top. The crowd's cheers intensified, but Malik's mind was elsewhere. The weight of everything, the expectations, the self-doubt, the fear of failure, seemed to lift from his shoulders in that moment. He had proven something, not just to the world, but to himself. Malik raised his arms in the air, the crowd's cheers flooding his senses. He had done it. He had faced the toughest challenge of his life, and he had come out victorious. But more importantly, he had faced the fight within himself, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of disappointing everyone, and had overcome it. As the referee raised his hand in victory, Malik realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was still long, and the challenges would only grow more difficult. But for the first time in his life, Malik felt ready to face whatever came next. Because now, he knew the most important thing, no matter how tough it got, no matter how much the world demanded from him, he had the strength to fight through it. The arena was quieter now, the sound of victory fading into the background as Malik sat in the locker room, his body sore and bruised but his spirit alive with a new kind of energy. He had won, yes, but more than that, he had proven something that went beyond the fight. The world had expected him to rise, to be the champion they had been waiting for, but Malik's victory wasn't just for the crowd, for the media, or even for his coach. It was for him. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt truly free. He wasn't the underdog anymore. He wasn't the boy who had stumbled into the gym, unsure of his place in the world. He wasn't even just the guy who had knocked out an 80 kilograms fighter with one punch. He was something more. Something his younger self would never have believed. He was a fighter who had fought for his soul, not just for a title. The crowd's roar still echoed in his mind, but now, as the adrenaline began to wear off, the full weight of the past few months settled on his shoulders. It hadn't just been the training or the fights that had made this moment possible. It had been the moments of doubt, the sleepless nights, the fear of failing that had pushed him to dig deeper than he ever thought possible. The victories in the ring were just the surface. The real battle had always been inside. As Malik walked out of the locker room and into the corridor, his coach, Ron, met him with a proud grin. The man's face was alight with pride, but there was something else in his eyes. Something softer. "You did it," Ron said, clapping him on the back. "Not just for you, Malik, but for everyone who doubted you." Malik nodded, exhaustion in his bones but something else burning in him, gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this point. The media was waiting just outside, and Malik could hear the buzzing of their cameras and voices. But he wasn't in a hurry to face them. He wasn't sure he ever would be. He knew the world would be clamoring for his story, wanting to know what came next for the new champion. But Malik knew better than anyone that this moment didn't define him. It was just one chapter of his life, one that would eventually fade into the pages of time. Back at his apartment later that night, Malik collapsed onto the couch, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the roaring crowds just hours ago. His phone buzzed with a flurry of notifications, but this time, Malik let it ring. For once, he wasn't chasing the next win, the next fight, the next accolade. He was just Malik, just a man, trying to figure out what this victory meant in the grand scheme of things. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts a jumble of reflections and questions. He thought of his mother, of how proud she would have been. He thought of his sister, Alicia, and the quiet support she'd always given him, even when the road seemed impossible. And then, his thoughts drifted to the gym, to Ron, and to the guys who had trained with him from day one. He had never been alone in this journey, even when it had felt like he was. But now, Malik had something new to think about. Something bigger than boxing, bigger than any fight. What would his legacy be? What did he want to leave behind? The world would remember his knockout, the image of him standing victorious in the ring. But the real question was whether he could create something that lasted longer than the applause. Weeks passed, and the world didn't stop. The media continued to flood in, sponsorships lined up, and bigger opportunities began to present themselves. But Malik's focus remained clear. It was no longer about the fame, the title, or even the next fight. It was about creating a legacy that would inspire others long after the spotlight had faded. Malik began to give back in ways he hadn't imagined before. He opened a boxing training program for kids in underprivileged neighborhoods, focusing not just on the sport, but on the life lessons that came with it. Discipline, resilience, and the understanding that the real fight was never just in the ring, it was in the heart. He wasn't just giving back to the community, he was building something that mattered beyond the fame and the fortune. He wanted to be remembered as a fighter who had done more than knock people out. He wanted to be remembered as someone who had shown others that the fight for success was always within reach, no matter the obstacles. As he stood in front of a group of kids in the gym one afternoon, Malik realized that the journey he had taken wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside. It was for the boy who had walked into the gym with a chip on his shoulder, determined to prove something. It was for the fighters who would come after him, who needed someone to show them that they too could rise above their circumstances. "Listen up," Malik said, standing in front of the group, his voice strong and clear. "I'm here today because I didn't give up. I kept fighting when the odds were stacked against me. And you can do the same. Boxing is more than just a sport. It's a way of life. It teaches you how to handle the punches that life throws at you. And trust me, life will throw plenty of punches. But if you keep your chin up and keep swinging, you'll get through it." The kids stared up at him with wide eyes, some of them already looking at him like he was the hero they had been waiting for. Malik smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him that he hadn't felt in years. This was the moment he had been fighting for. Not the titles, not the applause, but the chance to make a real difference. Later that night, Malik sat down with Alicia at their favorite diner, the soft hum of conversation around them providing a backdrop to their quiet reflection. "You know," Alicia said, stirring her coffee, "I think you're really doing it. You found your purpose." Malik smiled, looking out the window at the city lights. "I think I have too. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about everyone who's been there, everyone who's struggled. I'm just the one who got lucky enough to get out of the ring." Alicia chuckled. "I don't think it was luck, Malik. You've always had it in you. It just took you a while to see it." Malik nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't just a boxer anymore. He was a symbol. A symbol that no matter where you started, no matter how hard the fight, you could always rise, just like he had. As the sun set over the city, Malik stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, staring out at the horizon. He could feel the weight of everything, the victories, the struggles, the pressure, and the possibilities ahead. But there was one thing he was sure of: this was just the beginning. He had fought for a place in the world. And now, he was going to fight to make sure that place was one that would leave a lasting legacy, one that would inspire, uplift, and remind others that no matter how dark it seemed, there was always hope. Malik closed his eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over him. He had already won his greatest fight, finding his true purpose. And that, he knew, was the victory that mattered most. It wasn't the noise that Malik missed. Not the roar of the crowd or the flash of cameras. What lingered with him now, months after the night he dropped Jared, the Beast, Cooper with a single, blistering punch, was the silence that came after. That hush, split seconds before the eruption, was where Malik found himself the most. Because in that silence, in that suspended breath of the world watching, he felt clarity. Not ego. Not pressure. But clarity. That was the moment he realized, he didn't fight for fame. He fought for survival. For respect. For a voice in a world that had tried to shut him out since the day he was born. And now, he stood in that silence again, not in a stadium, but in a small community gym that smelled of sweat, effort, and new beginnings. The heavy bag swung from a rusted beam overhead. The floor creaked when you stepped just right. Kids with scuffed shoes and chipped teeth wrapped their hands like they were preparing for war. But their eyes, some tired, some wild, some unsure, looked at Malik like he was more than a fighter. Like he was proof. Proof that rising was possible. Proof that pain didn't have to mean the end. Proof that a boy who got laughed out of his first class could come back and build something that no one could take away. Malik walked the room with quiet authority, offering a nod here, a correction there, but mostly just presence. He knew now, more than ever, that showing up mattered. That to a lot of these kids, consistency was the only love they trusted. So he showed up. Every day. Even when his muscles ached. Even when the headlines faded. Even when the world moved on. He never stopped showing up. Not because of what he got, but because of who he'd once been. He saw himself in every kid who flinched when someone raised their voice. In every kid who hit the bag a little too hard, like they were trying to shut something up inside themselves. In every kid who didn't believe, not yet, that they could be something more than what the world had told them. He didn't need the ring anymore to fight. Life had given him a new arena. One where the rounds weren't timed and the damage wasn't always visible. But it mattered more. Here, every lesson was personal. Every punch had a story. And every small breakthrough, a kid choosing not to fight at school, a girl stepping into the gym for the first time, a teen breathing through his anger instead of lashing out, was a title win. Malik kept his own championship belt tucked in a dusty storage closet, buried beneath old towels and broken gloves. He hadn't looked at it in months. Because these days, his victories didn't shine. They walked through the door at 4 p.m. every afternoon, dragging backpacks and carrying trauma in their bones. And they listened. Because Malik didn't preach. He remembered what it felt like to have adults talk at you like you weren't even in the room. So he asked questions instead. What are you carrying today? What was the hardest thing about this week? What did you do even though it scared you? And he told the truth. He told them about fear. About wanting to quit. About crying alone after practice. About punching walls and hating himself. And he told them what changed. How one moment, one person, one choice to stay could ripple out into everything. One night, as the gym emptied and the cold crept through the broken windowpane, Malik sat on the ring steps and watched Trey, one of the youngest, quietest kids, stay behind. The boy said nothing, just hit the bag slow, like he was trying to talk through it. Malik didn't interrupt. He knew the language. After a while, Trey stopped and turned. "You think someone like me could really win?" he asked. His voice was small. Not scared, uncertain. Like hope was too fragile to trust. Malik stood, walked over, placed a glove on Trey's shoulder. "You already are," he said, calm and firm. "Showing up every day. Fighting the part of you that says quit. That's a win most people never even try for." And in that moment, Malik saw it again, that flicker. That faint ignition of self-worth. It was everything. The media still called sometimes. They wanted the story of the punch. ESPN ran reruns of that fight like it was a miracle. But Malik rarely picked up the phone anymore. He wasn't avoiding the spotlight, he just no longer needed it. Because real light, the kind that heals, was already shining through every bruise, every breakdown, every battered kid who came back one more time when it would have been easier to disappear. Alicia called him that night, just to check in. "I saw another clip of you online," she said. "You know people are calling you the street saint now." Malik laughed, leaning against the wall, eyes half closed. "I ain't no saint," he said. "I just remember what it felt like to have no one." There was a long pause. Then she said, "Well, for what it's worth, you've become what we needed back then. And what these kids need now." Malik sat with that. Not proudly. Quietly. Like you sit with something heavy and holy. Years from now, he knew no one would remember the exact punch that made him famous. They wouldn't care what round it was, or who he fought. What they'd remember, what he hoped they'd remember, was the boy who kept showing up. The man who turned pain into purpose. The fighter who learned that the real battle was never about fists. It was about choosing to get back up, again and again, in a world that keeps trying to knock you out. And that's what he left behind. Not a legend. A legacy.